All right. Hello, everyone. Right, we'll just give a couple minutes to let people filter in. Hello, hello. Hi, folks. As you join, would love for you to utilize the chat function. Let us know if you have any favorite games of yours, present or past. Would love to know what everyone is playing.
Yeah, it could be playing right now. It could be something you loved playing when you were younger, something your family plays together. And it doesn't need to be a video game. It can be any kind of game.
Pokemon, yes.
But there's so many Pokemons. Which Pokemon do you like to play the most?
All
Oh,
of
at the same
them.
time. You're playing Pokemon Go while you're playing like the old Pokemons on your Game Boy. Yeah.
Little Nightmares. Just finished Kirby and the Unforgotten World. Crazy good. Oldie but goodie. Star Fox Assault. Oh,
Oh
wow.
yeah.
Yeah,
And the GameCube.
that's a
I love the
throwback.
GameCube.
Monster Hunter. Super excited for Wilds. Am I saying that right?
I made a card game called Monster Hunter before the video game came out. And I was all like happy with this card game that I had made. And then like the real monster or the video game Monster Hunter came out. I'm like, oh, they stole my idea.
Oh my gosh.
It wasn't really stealing. It's a game about hunting monsters. So what else are you going to call it?
Stone, do you have any favorite games personally?
Uh, well, right now I've been playing a lot of Gran Turismo VR, which with I have the steering wheel and the pedals and everything, and so that's just a blast to put on the VR gear and just like be immersed inside the cars that are going really fast. I love that.
Oh, that's amazing. Do you
Yeah,
wear a headset with that?
yeah, yeah.
Ah, so cool.
My wife can't do it though. She can't even sit still in a car. She starts to get motion sickness even when she's not moving. Like, okay, this is not going to be for you.
Oh no. Yeah, that's tough, battling motion sickness with VR.
Yeah. It's in the beginning, there's you feel it a lot, but then the more you do it, the better you get. The easier it becomes. But one of the things they say is if you start to feel even a little bit sick, you should just stop immediately and not try to push through it. Because if you try to push through it, you actually get worse, and then your body like will rebel against VR. It's like, no, I don't even want to put on that headset anymore.
Oh no.
I tried to get my mom to do it, and she was like, "It'll mess up my hair." And so, but you need to try this like really cool thing. No, no, if it messes up my hair, I'm not in. So
It's worth a little bit of hair
yeah,
flying. It's fine.
I say like the technology's got problems when you can't get your wife and your mom to play it. So that's
All right. Well, we're at 4 minutes in, so I think we're good to get started. Good morning, everyone, depending on where you're tuning in from. And thanks so much for joining and welcome to our second event of this school year's ABG Pre-Apprenticeship Speaker Series. I'm Sarah, BRIC's Director of Communications and your moderator. And the speaker series from BRIC aims to provide early awareness and education about the variety of careers across animation, visual effects, and gaming. If you were able to join us last week, we reviewed the animation industry's roles and pipeline. So today we're switching things up a bit with an overview of the gaming industry with our special guest here, Stone Librande of Riot Games. After Stone's presentation, we'll do an audience Q&A for the last 15 minutes of the session. So make sure to use that Q&A function at the bottom of your window to submit any burning questions you might have for Stone. So Stone, I would love to kick it off to you. Please tell the audience a little bit more about your journey, your career, and more about the gaming industry overall.
All right. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for inviting me and happy to chat with everyone. So I've been working at Riot Games now for about 10 years. I work in the research and development group, the R&D group. So unfortunately, I can't talk about anything I do because it's all like super top secret. So I'll talk about some other games that I've worked on. I've been working in the industry for quite a while. So I'll talk about some past projects, but I won't be able to talk about anything from Riot Games, unfortunately. All right, so I've been making games ever since I was a kid. Like I'm pretty old, so I was like a kid when Star Wars first came out in the movie theaters, and I loved it. But back then you couldn't just go get a DVD or stream it online on Disney Plus. You had to like go to the movie theater to watch it and buy a movie ticket. So I loved the movie so much that I wanted to like kind of keep experiencing it. So I would make like these little board games based on Star Wars, where I'd cut out all the spaceships and toothpicks and glue everything together, and you kind of have these battles with the Death Star. Then as I was growing up, I grew up in the arcade times, like in the 80s. So this isn't a picture of me, but it might as well be. Like this is pretty much what my life felt like growing up all through junior high and high school. I'm always playing kind of the newest games that were coming out, hanging out a lot in the arcades, spending a lot of quarters. When I got out of high school, I started out really wanting to get into film school, mostly because of Star Wars. I wanted to go to USC, which is the school that George Lucas went to. So I'm like, well, if it was good enough for George Lucas, then I got to go there. During that time at USC, I got really involved in animation, but USC isn't the best animation school, at least it wasn't at that time. So I switched over to Cal Arts, which is a really good, like it's Disney's animation school that they have. So while I was there, that's right when 3D computer graphics started getting really big. And so I got really into like what you could do with 3D graphics and how that could be a lot better than things you would have to do with hand-drawn animation. And that eventually led into me getting my master's degree at MIT at the Media Lab, where I did a lot of work with some very, very early like image generation stuff, like with things like with Midjourney today. It was like the very first kind of ultra primitive versions of that. And if you know the cartoon Garfield, Jim Davis, who's the creator of Garfield, he was my sponsor, and he wanted a way of like generating lots of Garfields based on the examples that he was giving it. Then, got older, got married, had some kids, and then every year for Christmas, I'd make a little game for my kids. So these are some of the different games as they got older. So you can kind of see in the beginning, they're really kind of sloppy. The kids helped make them. We just had fun with glitter glue. Then they started getting a little more advanced with, trying to knock robots over with marbles and trying to learn the alphabet by flying through space, or just sometimes just like simple kind of like fishing games, dexterity games. And as they continued to get older, the games got more sophisticated. So by the time they were in their teens, we're playing these like epic space games where you're trying to take over the galaxy with these spaceships, or you're like a robot and you're fighting a lot of zombies by programming them, because I wanted to teach them about computer programming through a game. So these are all kind of like every year, and I still do it to this day, except now it's for my grandkids. I make a game for Christmas for them. When I got into the industry, which was about 2000 or so, I started working at Blizzard. I worked on Diablo 3, and then went over to EA, where I worked on the games that you see here. And I'll talk a little bit about at the end about SimCity if we have some extra time. Also, I don't really like, I make a lot of like video games, and I make as a hobby, I make a lot of board games, but I haven't professionally published a lot of stuff. A few of the things I have worked on, I was able to make a magic card for one of the magic sets, which was really fun. Kind of a dream come true, because I grew up playing like lots of magic cards as soon as it came out. At Riot, I worked on a board game called Mechs vs. Minions. And that zombie and robot one that I just showed you, this is kind of a League of Legends reskin of that game, where we were playing the zombie and robot game at work. And we're like, this is a pretty fun game. What if it was League of Legends themed? So we were able to like spin that up as a little side initiative. And then this game, Alakazam. So this is kind of a rock, paper, scissors game. It's another one that I made for my kids when they were young, that they would play in the backseat of the car. And I showed it to a publisher, Chronicle Books, and they thought it was kind of a cool idea. So we actually like published this and printed it out. I also teach game design classes in addition to working full-time in the industry. I teach on the weekends, and I've been doing that for like 25 years now. So, it's over 250 students easily that I've worked with to make their own paper, like card or board games over the semester. That's usually their final project, is they have to do kind of a board game. So I've seen a lot of those. So, basically just kind of my quick summary is like, I've always made games ever since I was a kid. I continue to make games now. I make games as a hobby. I make games professionally. If you ever want to talk about games, like I could do that nonstop forever. So I just love it. I love everything about it. All right. So one of the questions is, what is a game? A lot of you watching this talk, I presume, you want to get into the game industry. You're interested in making games, hopefully professionally. But first was like, well, like we want to make games, but what is a game? What makes a game a game? We all kind of know it when we say it. And that's one of the reasons I had you type in the games at the beginning of just like, look at all these different games that people play, whether it's Pokemon or checkers or soccer. There's all these games that we would no one would argue. It's like, oh, that's a game. Pokemon's a game. Soccer's a game. But what makes it that? Like, why? How does it work? What's the internals when we break it down? So the definition that I like to use, it's not really a dictionary definition. It's more of let me back up here. It's more of a visual framework to think about it, to talk about it. So every game has a starting condition. So you initialize it somehow. Everybody gets set up. We're ready to go. And then you're heading towards some goal. But the blue arrow there is the gameplay itself. That's the journey that the player is going to be going on, is getting from the start to the next goal that they have. But if that was all it is, then it's not very interesting, because we could all play a game right now. And let's try it. It's really simple. The start condition is sit in the chair that you're sitting in. Cool. Hopefully everybody's all ready to go. If you're not sitting, then sit down. And then we're going to start the game. And the goal is to sit in your chair. Ready? Go. Okay, so we all won at exactly the same time. Not a very interesting game because there was no blue arrow there. The start and the goal were like the same thing. So very uninteresting experience. So how do we make it more interesting? We have to put some opposition in the way. We have to do something to prevent the player from getting to that goal. So now I can modify that game that I just told you about. Let's play it again with a new modification. So to start, sit in your chair, just like you're doing right now. And then your goal is going to be to touch your feet to the ceiling. All right, ready, go. Okay, I don't know, I can't see you. You're not on video. I hope someone at least is trying. But we can make the opposition so difficult that you won't even try. Probably a lot of you just kind of maybe looked up the ceiling and said, forget it. But it's not impossible. I could reward you if I said, I'm going to give a full college scholarship to whoever touches their feet to the ceiling first. You guys would be running out and getting ladders and, having your parents lift you up, to touch your feet up. So if we can incentivize people, we can get them around even the hardest obstacles, as long as the rewards are interesting and compelling to them. So usually what's going to happen then is we can't just have a wall that we hit you into that you never can get to the goal. What makes the game interesting is that we're giving you decisions. And so you're like, there's some obstacle in the way. How many different ways can I think of getting around that or through that to get to the goal that I need to get to? And having those decisions is like a hallmark, a quality of a game, a part of the framework. The next step really is that there's some rules that define all of this stuff. So how do we know how to start? How do we know what our goals are? What are our decisions? What's stopping us from getting to those goals? That all has to be defined, and usually has to be defined in advance before people start engaging with the game. So that would be the rule system that every game has. And then the last piece is really, it only comes to life when you interact with it. And notice there's two arrows here. It's not just me putting stuff into the system. The system is updating and then giving me information back out again based on what I put into it. So that interaction component is critical to really like bring the game to life. Otherwise, it's just kind of like a box that sits on your shelf. It doesn't really become a game until people start interacting with those pieces. So this is kind of like, what is a game? It's kind of interesting way of thinking about it. And we can apply this now to soccer or checkers or Pokemon. And we see that no matter what game we pick, it will follow this framework. But it's not really, to me as a game designer, not really interesting to say like, is something a game or is something not a game? Like, is brushing your teeth a game or not? We could look at this framework and we could try to decide whether or not, there's not much opposition in brushing your teeth. So maybe we'd say that's not a very good game. But from the point of view of a game designer, what I like about this framework is it kind of like tells me, what my job is. What does a game designer do? Well, a game designer's job is to take all of these little pieces. And if you think of each one as a slider bar from not very good to awesome, our job as game designers is to push all those arrows up as far as we can. We need the best goals, the best decisions, the easiest to understand rules, the deepest interaction. All these things have to be as like high quality and interesting and entertaining as we can possibly make them. All right, so just kind of a quick overview, just very high level framework, just to kind of set tone for the rest of the talk. And then the last part, a lot of people say, well, games are fun. And from a game design point of view, I kind of, in my teams, I'm like, don't use the word fun. It's not allowed, which is kind of strange because it's like games are fun. Why can't you use the word fun? So the reason why is it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't provide direction. If I were to say, I'm a game designer and our game's not very good, we should make it more fun. No one's going to argue and say like, what? That's crazy. You shouldn't make our game more fun. Everybody's going to agree, but it also doesn't tell you what you need to do. So let me run through these really quick. These are from Mark LeBlanc, who's an engineer at Riot that I've worked with for many years. So he said, instead of using the word fun, use these terms instead, like sensation. This is like, how does it look? How does it sound? What kind of, if you're in VR, like what's kind of going on, just the experience itself. The next one is fantasy. A type of fun that you could have is make-believe. You're pretending to be a space marine, you're pretending to be a Pokemon trainer. So those worlds where you kind of enter and you can be something you're not. Narrative, some people just have fun just watching the story unfold. And sometimes it's an author who like has written out the story and everybody who plays the game is going to see the same story. But often games create their own stories. So even if you're playing a game of soccer, or you're playing a game of chess, different stories are going to start to come out of those as emergent stories that are still kind of entertaining to watch the progression. Especially if you like to watch sports on television, a lot of those have a narrative, but there's no author who wrote that story. Challenge, a lot of game designers that I know personally are really into this one as a type of fun. Like you just want to compete, you want to show that you're the best, you want to get high on the leaderboard, you want to get to diamond ranks. So all of those things could be very fun to certain type of people. But for instance, like my wife, she doesn't really like challenge games. She finds them really stressful. So she's much more into games that would bring out fellowship, social bonding. We're going to get together, we're going to eat some food, we're all going to play a game together on the table. And it doesn't matter who won or who lost. What really mattered was that we all came together and we had a shared experience together as a group. And she would say, that was a really fun game. It's like, but you lost. She's like, yeah, I don't care. Where for me, it'd be like, I lost. What a terrible game. So everybody's can have like a different version of fun here. Discovery, this is just being able to, fog of war, there's a big map, you're trying to like discover the whole world, see what's out there. Expression, this is somewhat similar to fantasy, but this lets you kind of in some ways be yourself. Like you can act different roles, but you can also be what I call like your true self. You're permitted to act in certain ways in a game that maybe in real life people would say like that's not a very good way to behave, like backstabbing your friend to take their money. You wouldn't do that in real life, but in a game, no problem. And then a mindlessness. Sometimes it's just fun to relax and just sit back and play some Candy Crush or do some grinding in an MMO. So a lot of these different types of fun, it's not saying there's exactly 8 types of fun. There could be 9 or more, or you could try to like compress some of these together. The interesting part here is that instead of saying, should I make our game more fun? I would say our game is lacking in fellowship. When people play together, it's supposed to be an online game, but people aren't joining up together. So they're not getting a social experience. Now that's something we can really act on. And as a team, we can all decide if we agree with that or not, which is a lot more precise than just saying, oh, the game should be more fun. Okay, so let's get into kind of the main topic here, which is an overview of the industry. I've talked a lot about being a designer because that's what I am, but let's talk about some of the other roles in the industry. So a lot of times, you have some idea, like a little simple sketch, and you want to make this kind of shiny, glowy object eventually. You can't just like, I have a good idea, then let's just make that idea. Like it never works that way, especially with games, because there's so many variables and you need so much play testing and interaction. So what is that purple arrow there? Like, how do we get from that simple idea to like our complex like vision of what we want this thing to be for players when it eventually ships? And then I should just point out, this talk is about my experiences working at AAA studios with like tens of millions of dollars of budgets that we have. So, I've worked, like I said, I worked at Blizzard, I worked at EA, I worked at Riot. all of these games are like kind of top tier. They really want to make big games. There's plenty of like indie type games, smaller games, iPhone games. There's a lot of different things you can do in the industry with a lot of different team shapes and sizes. So this talk will mostly be about like my experiences as working as a AAA designer on, like I said, sometimes $100 million are spent to get these games out. So you've got to do it kind of right. You just don't want to like, hey, I have an idea. Here's a sketch. Can you give me $100 million? Like, it's not going to work that way ever. So what you have to do is slowly prove that you're worthy of more money from the company. And at any time, the company can decide like, well, we're going to just cut our losses. We're done funding you. So we have to do things very, very slowly so that we're not just coming out the gate with a huge amount of people. We start out with like, we've got this kind of idea. Let's just kind of play around with it. And we only need maybe one, sometimes just one person can do it. Sometimes maybe a team of 5, but it's a very, very small group of people who just want to kind of start digging into it, like taking that little sketch and looking at it in different ways, talking about different audiences, doing research of games that are kind of like the one you're thinking about, coming up, with the new discoveries. But it's just a lot of kind of pushing on things, but really trying to answer these 2 questions, like what is this game going to be and who would play this? What kind of player would like this? It's a mistake to say like every person on the planet is going to love this game and that's who we're trying to target. You usually need to be very narrow focused because of those 8 types of fun I talked about. You want to like find that audience who's going to really love your game and then just focus on them. And anybody who's not going to like your game, you don't have to care about it. Like, you don't need to make them love your game. You can just ignore them and that's going to be fine. So who are those people? I talked about the designer already. Usually the designer typically kind of has a vision of where they want the game to go, and they're going to provide direction as you start to explore. They have to document a lot. So if you want to be a designer, if you think that's an interesting career to pursue, then start working on your writing skills, because a lot of my day is spent just like writing documents. So if you don't like writing, then you're probably not going to really enjoy being a designer. And then the player journey, that blue arrow that I talked about in that other diagram, it's like, how is the player getting introduced to this game? What's going to happen to them as they go towards their goals that I'm giving them? And then the skills, communication, I talked about writing, but also you need to be a good speaker. You need to be able to present your ideas intelligently. You need to be able to like do PowerPoint, slideshows, things like that. So any way that you can communicate effectively is going to help the team be organized. This macro and micro scopes. So what I mean by that is that as a designer, you have to see the whole picture. You have to see that whole blue arrow, understand like the entire player journey, but you also need to know every detail. Like, when I push the A button, how far is this thing going to jump? And what's that feel of that jump? So you're looking at moment to moment things that may be measured in microseconds, and all the way out to, this is like going to take 40 hours to play. So we're going to be like covering a huge amount of ground as a designer. And you need that ability to like at any moment zoom in and then zoom back out. And if you're only staying at one level, then you're going to be missing the other half of that. So just being very flexible in how you understand from these 2 different levels. Then working with constraints. So this is something where a lot of people who don't work in the industry, you're like, oh, I want to be a video game designer, because you just think up cool stuff and other people do it for you. It's like never works that way. Often what happens is that other people who aren't designers, say marketing people or your executives who are trying to make money, they're like, here's the kind of thing we need you to create, and you have this much time to do it, and we're going to give you this much money. So you're working on very kind of like boxed in. You can't just do whatever you want and someone's going to make it for you. You have to be given all these constraints and then work within that box that you've been given. And then the last part is like just understanding like spreadsheets, analysis, statistics, probabilities, being able to kind of just work with numbers and data. You're going to be getting a lot of data when you start playtesting. So you need to be able to organize it all and then make calls about, based on that data, what we should do next. All right, software engineers. So I actually started my career as a software engineer at Blizzard. I've worked on different tools for the artists to make Diablo 3. And the skills are the type of things you're gonna be working on, is especially early on, is just let's build some kind of system that we can prototype quickly in. Let's do some evaluation of the kind of technology we want to use. Like, the big difference if you're going to make a PlayStation 5 game or if you're going to make a web-based game, for instance. And then you actually are like, you implement a lot of the stuff. So there's a lot of documentation, there's a lot of discussion, but the software engineer is the one who's actually like programming everything, getting it to run, fixing the bugs. So obviously a skill you're going to need is to learn programming. If you're not into programming, you definitely don't want to be a software engineer. That's kind of obvious. But you also need to be really good at math. So it's not just about, can you write code? Knowing, especially like geometry, trigonometry, calculus, those actually, like, sometimes you'll take those classes in school and you'll be like, I'll never use this. But if you're working in the game industry as a software engineer, you use those skills all the time. So again, if you're like, you don't really like math, then probably a software engineer at a game company is not going to be the best job for you. Also problem solving and just attention to detail. Like, you're looking at lines of code, you're trying to find that one thing that's working or not working. And it requires a lot of thought. And sometimes you'll have something that works really well, but it just, you might be too slow. It might take up, too much of your CPU. So then you have to go in and like find the things that are going to make it better. But in the beginning, this ideation phase, you usually don't care about that too much, because you want to just be going fast. And then I'll talk more about that in a second with prototyping. All right, so then artists, that's like kind of the other people that you're going to have early on. It's just somebody who can make people feel different things, just kind of show the the experience of what it might be like to play this game even before it's created at all. You could just show pieces of paper or storyboards, showing everything, from the beginning to the end, what the arc might be like, and then creating content that will be in the early versions of the game. So being able to draw, paint, knowing your art tools like Photoshop is going to be super helpful, because you're going to be working in a digital media. So, you want to, just knowing how to like sketch in a sketchbook isn't going to be good enough. You're going to have to like eventually get it into a format that the game will like it in. Being able to tell a story visually. So, a lot of people can draw really well and they say like, oh, look, I just drew this bird and it's a beautiful bird. But you look at it and it's just a bird. Like, it doesn't tell a story. You don't feel like a bigger kind of arc of the bird. But a great artist, you look at it and you're like, oh, I understand where this bird lives. I understand what his life must be like. Like, you can pull all sorts of interesting stuff out if the artist is really good at being able to communicate story through often just still images. And then the last skill is like 3D modeling. This isn't necessary for every type of game, but being able to, work in Maya, being able to create the models that we're going to import into the game can be really valuable. So these are the kind of like, early on, like I said, the type of people that you might need. But really at the ideation phase, everybody kind of does a little bit of everything. So everybody's kind of doing some design. Usually all these people early on know how to code and work on the program together. People, can sketch and draw. So we all get together, we work together, but we tend to have our specialties, the thing that we're really, really good at. All right, so now we've got our kind of ideation phase. We pick the thing, like this is the thing that we think is going to be the game that we want to build. Out of all the ideas we've looked at, we've narrowed it down. So now we go into this prototyping phase, and here we just want to go as fast as possible. We're not trying to be perfect. We're not trying to be optimal. We're just trying to get something playable so that we can prove that the idea is actually feasible, that it will generate whatever type of fun that we've picked. So during this part, we're going to get a few more people. The team's going to get a little bigger. Usually up to around 15 people or so is about like the max size of a prototyping team. Otherwise, it gets slower the more people you get. So this just keeps things going fast, and you're going to throw away stuff. You're going to write a whole bunch of code, and then you're just going to delete it. No one's going to use it. You're going to make a lot of sketches. People are going to look at them and say, no, give me more sketches, throw those away. So back and forth, lots of iteration, lots of testing as fast as you can. But you're usually testing kind of a core idea. Obviously, you're not building the full game at this point. You're just trying to prove that the idea that you have, the thesis of your game, is going to appeal to that audience that you've selected. So during this time, we're going to get maybe a couple more specialist designers. Depending on the kind of game we make, we might want to get into some level design. System design is going to be more about just like how does all the pieces fit together. Level design might just be, you're going to be walking through this world, and we need that like all structured in a nice way. Software engineers, so now we're going to need more than just one of those. And they start to specialize pretty early as well into kind of like the system engineer who's just working on the infrastructure and the architecture, and then the gameplay engineer who is going to be like the interactive parts, like making the controllers work or working on the UI. And then the artists, so they're going to get more of those now. You often get a creative director around this time, somebody who really can understand like the big vision of the game, specialist concept artists, and then people who maybe are more into just only 3D and really good at modeling quickly. We're also going to start to like maybe add a producer, maybe two, because the team is now getting big enough that you have to be organized. And if you have a lot of people doing a lot of stuff at the same time, then it's just not going to work out for you. So we're going to have to like schedule. We have a certain amount of money. We don't want to spend more than we have. So the skills, you need to be a good leader. You're going to be kind of leading this project, and you're kind of the interface between the team and, say, the executive level of the company. So you're the one talking to maybe the CEO or some head of marketing about your project. You need to really understand project management, and spreadsheets are really important, flow charts, being able, again, to communicate, because instead of communicating usually within the team, like I said, you're communicating outside of the team as well. All right, so next up, now we're kind of like, we have our prototype and we've proven it. And let me just stop there to say, like, I've worked in R&D on, I don't even know how many, at least like 6 prototypes that have all been canceled right around this point. That we weren't able to do the thing that we wanted to do. We weren't able to prove it. The market conditions changed. There's many reasons to cancel a project. And part of being in R&D is that that's almost the expectation. It's like, it's not really a sad moment. I mean, it's a little bit sad because you put a lot of effort into something, but it's the expected outcome. That's what everybody believes is like, yep, that's what's going to happen. So from that point of view, we really kind of embrace it. We call it like failing fast. Like the quicker you can fail, then the less money and time you spent to get to your conclusions. And then maybe the next project you pick up, you can take all those learnings with you. So failing fast is not a bad thing. Failing slowly is, because now we've spent like $10 million and we have nothing to show for it. But what we don't want to do is get into pre-production with a prototype that hasn't proven what we're trying to do. So we can kind of think of it as a gate, like you're now allowed to go to this next section. So pre-production is, okay, we like that idea. We've picked the thing. We got the prototype that works really well. So now we're going to kind of build it all out. But we can't build a whole game yet, especially at a AAA company, because that's like a lot of work. So instead, we're going to pick one small part that we think represents the experience to the players. And we're just going to drill in on that one part and make sure that that's the best it can be. Kind of in some ways, like we call it often a vertical slice, meaning it's just like if you were to play the game but only play a little section of it, this is what it would feel like for the player to do. So kind of then we imply that once we get that done, the rest will just be kind of a scaling of that idea. But we have to do the small parts first before we're allowed to go big. So now we're going to go, from our 15 people, we may go up to 50. The project I'm on right now is actually in pre-production. I think we just went over 50 recently. So here you're kind of narrowing in, validating your ideas, doing a little bit of, definitely focusing a lot and scoping and refining of everything, trying to really say like, this is very representative of what we want to do. And it also tells us, because we're building this small thing, what it might be like to build the big thing. So at this point, we often throw away our prototypes for all the code and everything that was done, and we start over again. And we say, now we're going to do it right. Now we're going to build a really good foundation that will support the final game instead of the quick hacky kind of stuff we were able to get away with when we're trying to move really quick. So your tempo is going to slow down a lot, not just because you're just focused more, but because now we've got a lot more people on the team. So the designer group is going to grow a lot. So you might get a specialist, every game's different, but you might get somebody who comes in and it's like, their only job is to work on the camera and the controls, and that's it. You may even get 2 designers, one who's into camera and one who's into controls. Usually I often see them as the same person though. Then somebody might come along who's doing like just skills and abilities. If you're making a role-playing game or something, what are all the cool things? How can your character grow? Somebody who's just into tuning every little thing. The UX design is another type of design where you're just looking at the information that the player has to see to understand what they need to do next. You're going to get a lot more specialist software engineers. So somebody who's just only into networking. I've often been on teams where we do a lot of networking stuff, and the network people aren't really like, they don't even really consider themselves gamers in a way. Like, they might like to play games, but they're not working on the game part of the game. They're working on a very like incredibly detailed problem about how to get bits to move across the internet efficiently, which has, in some ways, nothing to do with the game. But if that doesn't work, then all the rest of the game is going to fall apart. Engineers who just work on the physics systems. You'll often get a graphics engineer at this point who understands like optimal ways to make, your graphics card, get all the functioning out of it, all the cool effects that modern computers can do. And then your audio engineer might come in around this time too, setting up all the sound systems. How are we going to do, our music, our the SFX, the sound effects, and the voiceover. How is that going to all work together as a system? Then we start to get more specialist artists. We get people who are like, the only kind of art they do is interface art. They do maybe a lot of icons and a lot of buttons and menus and how that stuff is all going to look. Specialist animators who just get somebody else does a 3D modeling and sets it all up, and the animator's job is to just make it come to life. VFX, all the explosions that you see, like all this fireworks, sparkly stuff, it's coming from a very special artist. And then even the lighting of like the time of day, the way the shadows look, that's going to be one artist who just focuses just only on that. So you can already kind of see, like, as we go further and further, we get more and more people, but each person becomes incredibly specialized in what they do. And now, because we have all those people, we're going to need a lot more producers. So it covers a big range of tasks, but just operations, which is, we're spending a lot of money and we have equipment and we've got like all, like vacation scheduling and all of the stuff going on. Somebody who maybe doesn't really work on the game at all, but just keeps the team organized and make sure that we don't like lose all of our money and spend it in bad ways. The product owner who's just kind of like looking at the whole thing as like, we're going to eventually ship this, all the different managers that you have to start getting. So in addition to being a designer, I'm also a manager, and I have 4 different designers that I manage. So that takes up some extra time where I'm not designing. I'm just working on making other designers better on the team. And then people who maybe are into monetization, that maybe, especially at Riot, we make free games, but then we want players to spend money on them. So how does that whole system work? How much revenue are we expected to get? Are players even willing to spend money on the game? And why would they want to do that? So having a specialist in that role who's done that on other games is incredibly important, especially at Riot. And then we usually like kind of turn on a QA team. And at that point, we start to get people whose only job it is just to play the game and find bugs and then track those bugs, make sure they get fixed. And if we have outside play tests, they're often the ones that are doing that. So many of you who want to get into the industry, it's a very common path to work in QA first, because you don't really need to have a shipped game or some other like big game that you've worked on in the past to be able to get a job as, say, like a video game designer or an artist or an engineer. You often need a portfolio that includes like the really big cool things you've worked on. Where for a QA, it's often just like, I just love playing video games and I have these skills, I'm really precise, I have this analytical thinking, I'm really organized, and I do know enough about technology to understand like how to track bugs and what kind of bugs we're looking for, how to talk to engineers and designers about things. So if like I said, it's a really good entry level. Some people that I know, the best QA people I know, like that's what they love doing. That's actually their passion. And they don't want to graduate to anything else. They just want to get better and better at QA and kind of work within that discipline. But many of the QA people I know, especially the younger ones, are just in there so they can like get their foot in the door and then eventually move on to programming or art or design later on as they start to get more familiarity. And I've seen many QA people advance up out of QA and become designers or engineers or artists. All right, so now we've kind of proven our little small chunk, our vertical slice. So now we've got to do like, let's build the whole thing. And now you're in production. And this is kind of the time where the company is making a commitment and saying, we're going to ship your game. How much money do you need? How much time do you need? If everything looks good, then here you go. Here's your $100 million check or whatever crazy amount that they think it's worth. So now we're going to go up to maybe 100 or more people. And it's hard to even count at some point because a lot of the people that are working on the project aren't really employees of the company. They're outsourcing, they're contractors. If we need lots of art, we're not going to hire a lot of artists. We're just going to go get one like art house outside and hire them to just work with outsourcing artists who could be in India or Korea or China. So we may never, on the team, we may never meet those people. We may never know who they are, or how many of them there are. We're just like, we just need all of this art. Can you just give us as much as you can, however we can get it? So during this phase, we're trying to ship. So we're going to be going through just constant testing, kind of working our way up through this process, making sure that everything is being validated, finalized, and lots of polish. Every little thing we can polish, we're going to make as best as we can until we run out of time. All right, so now the designers have expanded. In addition to all the designers I've already talked about, you might have very specialists like narrative designers who just work on story. Scripters, they're usually a type of designer who work very closely with engineering, but instead of writing code, they're making scripts, like simpler versions that the game will then import. So it makes it kind of nicer for, like, engineers are working on the low level stuff, but the designers who know how to script can work on it at kind of a higher level without having to, recompile the whole game every single time they make a change. You need a lot of content. So we have designers who are just working on different types of content and new areas to explore, new enemies to fight. And then depending on the kind of game you have, you may have just a designer who's just only into the combat system. Or often, the games like Diablo, you have several designers who are working on the combat system because that game is all about combat. And then software engineers, we're going to add in like a build engineer. So what that is, it's somebody who just makes sure that you can build the game, that you can compile it, that it runs. That's a full-time job. You have 50 or more people contributing to the game all day long, and you need to be able to play the game at any time you want. So how is all that stuff that's getting dumped in to our basically our repository where we keep all the code and data, how is that getting turned into a game? That's currently on my project right now, even though we're not in production. I think we have like 2 people who just only do this build engineering right now. Optimization, so we need it to be running as fast as we can, especially, like I said, if we're a network game. Every bit that we can save is like a little bit less cost for us to transfer data all around the world all day long. So we want that to be as optimal as possible. Specialist UX engineers who just like, how does the menus pop up and down? How are the buttons all working? And then we need lots of tools. So by tools, what I mean is like an engineer makes basically a little program that makes it easy for someone else to do something, like the scripting language for designers, or a way of importing art for artists to make it easier. Because everything is going to be at this big scale and we're going to be doing lots of stuff simultaneously, we need to be as efficient as possible. And then the artists, just bringing in, again, there's more here than I'm listing, but artists that are really good at just like painting the textures on every surface that's in the game. Rigging, which is what kind of, the animator will usually do this at first, but then often later on you'll get people who their only job is to rig. And if you don't know what that is, that's like kind of the skeleton inside of an animation that helps the animator pose it and kind of place it in the right way in the scene and go from frame to frame. Tech artists, so these are going to be like, implies like artists who are really technical, who know how to kind of use the computer and use the systems to make great things. So it's often like if you're doing shaders, a tech artist is going to be working on those shaders for your game. Content artists, just kind of endless, like I said, which is going to outsource a lot of those. And then I put into artists also the sound people. They're often broken out into their own sound group, but I consider them artists as well when you're like making a big musical composition or you're just working on the voiceover or sound effects. And then more producers. So the outsourcing that I talked about already, to being able, like on SimCity, we had one person and their only job was to organize the outsourcing effort. So they would take everything the team needed, they would go to the outsourcers, they would get it back from the outsourcers and give it to the team. And that was their full-time job. Localization, we want to ship this game all around the world. That means it has to be translated into every language, every country's language that we want to ship to. That's a full-time job near the end of the game, of like just managing that, especially if you have voice. So then you have to hire voice actors in different countries who can speak those languages and do all the translation. A lot of effort goes into that. And then regional partners. So this is kind of working with the different places all around the world and making sure that, if you're going into China, it's actually very difficult if you're in the United States to get your game into China. There's a lot of government approvals that are necessary. And then there's a lot of companies there that you have to work with in order to get your game in. So having somebody who's producer whose only job is just to manage like China is like something, especially for Riot, a really important role to have later on. Okay, and then now kind of get into the last like little bits here. So we've got marketing. This is where the marketing team kind of comes in. They're often not embedded in your team. They're a company resource, but you're pulling in people from that team as you get closer and closer to launching. So they're going to be doing, the advertising and really checking with all of your play tests to make sure that the audience is still really loving your game. Reaching out to influencers, things like that. And then if you want to get into marketing and of any form, but especially for video games, being able to understand kind of that brand management. If you're working at Riot, what kind of game do people expect to come from Riot? Like, is it going to fit in with that? And then within Riot, like, how are we going to shape that game? If you follow like Riot's new game that we're working on, 2XKO, which is a fighting game, a lot of that is like, what's the name of that game? What font are we going to use? What colors are the colors we're going to use? So you need to be really kind of artistic and creative in that way. Continually doing the market research to make sure it's like, this is where we need to advertise. Are we attracting the right people? Are we making sure that people even know our game exists? And, everything else on the internet now. So all that digital marketing, which is a lot different, than say like making a TV ad or doing a billboard, which you can do also today, but often most of the marketing now is just going to be through different websites. All right, so the very last section here is now we built it, we've shipped it, it's out there, but it's still probably not done yet. So, again, especially at Riot, but a lot of modern games now, they ship and then they keep getting worked on. So now we're going to support this thing. We're going to build it up. We're going to continue adding on to it. So it starts to basically get more and more filled out as time goes on. How many people you need? Big question mark, because a lot of games can come out at this point and then they don't make enough money and they get canceled. And so it's like, we need 0 people because we're not going to support this game anymore. It didn't meet our financial targets. So it's not necessary to continue working on this. Or maybe it's a really big hit and you weren't expecting it. And now all of a sudden you have a small team that made a huge hit and you can't support it. There's too many people playing it. Your servers are crashing. There's too many bugs are being found by the community that you didn't even know about, that people are demanding that you fix. And so now you have to be very reactive to all of that. So this is kind of an unknown. And in the old version of the industry, back when I first started, you would ship a game, it would go out on a CD or a DVD or whatever, and then you would never have to really worry about it anymore. But now, as soon as you ship, you have to be ready to support. And that is going to be just a completely new type of role. So again, depending on how that shape works out, you might have designers just working on the new modes and new content and continuously tuning things as, especially if it's a competitive game, players are going to find like all the bugs and all the ways of like optimizing. So the designers have to keep an eye on that. The engineering kind of changes. Now we're more support, we call it live ops. So the people who like continually make sure that all the data is being sent all the time and there's very little downtime with the servers, all the patches that might come out, and just being able to get the content that the designers are designing and the artists are creating, getting it out there to the players. How are we going to do that? Keep track of it all, and continual optimization. We always want to save money. So how are our server structures working? And how much are we spending on just bandwidth every month? If we can even save just a little bit, if there's millions of games being played, that works out to like real money is being saved, like hundreds of thousands of dollars just because you changed one line of code. And then we're going to get some new content artists that are just going to be working on like what's coming up next. And producers might get new producers. Sometimes their roles change. So they're still doing what producers do, which is like scheduling, managing the budget, making sure that everything's working okay. And then we'll often get customer support. Again, this isn't embedded on the team usually. This is a separate support service that Riot has, but we'll have to tap into them and make sure they can answer all the questions that players may have about, anything in the game, whether, it could be anything. A lot of reasons for people to complain to customer service about the game. Okay, so we're getting kind of close to the end. I'm just going to real quickly just run through some examples. This will be really fast, but just give you some tangible ideas of really what happens and what things look like. So I worked on the SimCity game. It came out about almost a decade ago. When we started out, ideation, hey, it's just a bunch of whiteboards. We're just talking. We're just kind of scribbling, trying to come up with ideas. Hey, we think this is an interesting way of approaching SimCity. Then as we start to get in more to the prototype phase, those ideas as documentation will get written up and everybody will kind of agree, like, this is the kind of game we think we're going to be making. So this is one of the design documents that I made for SimCity that kind of shows an overview, everything that the game is going to offer. But then each little section, we have to like go in and do the detail work on. Meanwhile, the engineers are making some often really ugly, we call it programmer art, where they don't have an artist. They're just trying to get ideas working and kind of proving out. Here they're kind of showing how water and maybe if there's oil under the ground, how those systems might work. Then pre-production, now we're getting ready to try to understand how to ship this game, what we're going to need. So this is where the concept artists come in and give us examples of different types of buildings. And there was hundreds of these, because SimCity's got so many types of buildings in it and they're all gorgeous. But this is the kind of art that I was talking about from our outsourcing manager. He would say, we need these kind of buildings. And then the artist would send stuff back to us that look like this. Then we're still kind of building up. We can play the game now, often in really, again, ugly ways. Nothing's textured, but the bones of it are there, the foundation's there. So we can draw roads, we can watch traffic kind of move around. Those blue ones that you see there in the upper right, those are just memory profiling to make sure that we're not exploding everybody's computer when they run this game, that we understand how to manage disk space and memory effectively. Then we start to get into we can now play the game. It's still, it's looking better, but still maybe a little ugly. We're testing out little individual systems. In this example, here's a fire, and we're going to put out the fire. A little fire truck's going to pull up. Then let's see. Yeah. And then as we start to move in later, my job as a designer is just hey, we need designs for all of these different systems. So I'm not going to go into any of these, but just to give you an idea of the type of things, designs that were created for SimCity. Then we get into production. Now everything's coming together. You can still see in this one, we haven't put all the textures in yet. So everything looks kind of white for right now, but it's all working. It's the right models. We're using the right code that we're going to ship. And then finally we ship it, and with all the lighting and animation and sound and everything, it all comes to life. So we end up with this beautiful little city that you can play around with. And just a few more pictures. And then I'm going to end it at that. And I know I just talked way too much. So we're not going to have a lot of time for questions. Sarah, I can stay just a little bit more if needed. So as long as the people watching, if you want to hang out, I'll try to answer as many questions as I can. All right. And it's just some ideas here for things that you might want to talk about, but I'll turn it over to you, Sarah. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Stone. That was so incredibly informative. I loved learning about all the different stages from ideation to live service and how all the different roles kind of evolve through each stage as well. That was very, very enlightening. I'd love to make sure that we answer a couple of key questions specifically for any teachers or classrooms that we might have tuned in with us. And the first one being, and I think you talked about this when you were talking about scripters when it came to designers, but if someone is interested in designing the art for characters, props, locations, etc. in gaming, how much experience do you think is required of coding and expected for those roles?
Usually the more the better is probably the simplest answer there. So a lot, it's a very competitive industry. And when someone's applying for a role, say as a designer, which normally you wouldn't think of as, you know, that you need to know programming to be a designer. But if two people apply and one of them has coding skills and one of them doesn't, then we're going to favor the person with coding skills over the one that doesn't. So there, it can't hurt you at all to like understand as much about computers as possible in every way you can if you want to work in the video game industry. So even if you're an artist and you just like love watercolors and you're just like the best watercolor painter ever, if you know more about computers and you know a little bit of programming and you can understand that, you're probably more likely to get a job in the industry than somebody who doesn't. So if you're an awesome artist, then yeah, maybe we'll hire you no matter what. And we'll say like, yeah, you don't know anything about digital art, but you're so good that we can't pass you by. But generally that's kind of a real big exception. So the more you know, the better. This is like as general advice I find is like the more that you're playing games, the less you're actually like learning to make games. And so this is something to watch out for because like we all love playing games and video games. If you're watching this talk, I'm guessing you really like it. So you just need to be careful that like, oh, I just spent 6 hours all night playing this game. Like, but you could have spent 6 hours working on your art or working on your programming. And when it gets down to now you're applying for a job and you're like, I got to level 50 in this game. And someone else is like, I finished all of this like computer graphics engine that I've been working on, you know, guess who's going to get hired? So.
That's a great tip. I
Yeah,
think
it's
it's
sad too, because we all
for a
wanted to
lot
sit
of
around and play
people to
games, and
get.
I think we can be great game developers.
Yes, it's so easy for us to get lost in the sauce and get
Yeah.
lost in the game. Another question, especially for our students in the audience, what would you recommend is a great gaming platform to start designing on?
Yeah, so the easiest one that you can all do today is get a deck of cards and a pencil and paper and maybe some dice. And if you really want to be a designer, then just you can make games that don't involve electronics at all and just make a fun game to play with your friends or your family. And I really recommend that as to see like, you know, people think they want to be designers because it sounds like a really cool job, but making a game can be really difficult. And even if you just only have a deck of cards and some dice, you'll find that it's pretty challenging to do. So I would always like, that's the easiest thing to do. It's like, and you can all do that right now. Anybody can pick up a deck of cards and start trying to make a game. When you start to get more into like video games though, there's, you know, Unity and Unreal are kind of like the main ones that I would recommend. I can't remember, one of those is free for students. I can't remember which one is. But they'll allow you to get kind of a starter license for it. Then mostly if you are very good at like self-discipline and you can like teach yourself things, there's thousands of videos to watch, tutorials, and just all the way from, you know, how to make a Pong game where just a ball bounces back and forth, all the way up to making full 3D games with animated characters shooting each other. So if you really want to get into understanding those systems, like I said, you can just download them and start goofing around with them pretty quickly. But there's a lot of effort involved. That's kind of what I was saying about the 6 hours of like, am I going to spend all night learning a new thing in Unreal, or am I going to spend all night like leveling up my character? You could, if you think of it, and I try to do this a lot myself, it's like learning how to make a video game is a game. It's like, it's a type of game activity, right? It's got its own goals. It's got like its own motivations. So if you can substitute, like, I love playing games with I love making games, then I would recommend getting into Unity or Unreal to start with. Just real quick in my career, Unreal and Unity weren't around when I first started. So every company built their own engines from scratch. So we had to learn every time you would like switch jobs or even sometimes teams in the same company, you'd have a whole new engine to work with. So understanding the big concepts are more important than in some ways of understanding all the details of one piece of software.
Love that. All right. We have a couple of Q&As from the audience here as well. Owen asks, what does the career path look like for someone looking to get into esports? Is the entry into gaming similar to traditional paths via QA as an example?
So I guess it depends on like what part of esports you want to get involved in. Like if you want to work on a game that is an esport, or do you want to work in the esports division of a game that's already established? So like, League of Legends and Valorant are already out there. Some people say like, oh, I want to work on the esports side of Valorant. And that's an established game where you're just going to come in and you're going to do, there's a lot of things you could be doing there. But that would be very different than saying, I want to make a whole new game that is going to be an esport and we're going to build it from scratch. So I guess, oh, and if you're still able to hear this and you can type in, if you want to kind of clarify what you mean by like working on esports.
We'll give Owen a chance to type in. Oh, looks like
Oh,
most
marketing.
likely
Okay.
marketing.
Yeah. Okay. So then you're probably, yeah, it's not like a game design job. It's our game development. It's going to be more like taking an existing thing. So I haven't worked too much with the esports people, so I don't have a great answer for this, but mostly you're going to need to be passionate about that sport. You're going to need to understand it, watch how it is marketed, kind of really, know all the teams, all the players, what's going on. But then you're probably going to, I don't even really know. I'm not going to give you a great answer on this because I don't have a good experience with it. Because if you're really asking for like, what's that entry level into that? Yeah, I'm sorry. I can't I'm trying to think of like pull something out of my head really quick and I can't do it. Because I'm not sure even what that first step might look like. But it's not really a QA role kind of thing that I would guess. In some ways, like if you got really good at esports, then you could then like when you retired, you could become into marketing. But that's like even harder than anything else I could think of is to be a professional esports player.
I will say, as someone with a marketing background, I would say maybe look into marketing specific internships that are available at those studios, because those definitely do exist. And going from there.
All right. Thank you for covering for me. Sorry, Owen.
We have one more question from Lou in the Q&A as well, who asks, for writing games, how many games can you write before submitting samples for work as a game writer? Is there a preferred narrative design tool you recommend, like Inkly, Twine, or something else?
We've used a lot of those in some of the games that I've worked on. I wouldn't say there's a preferred one. They're different types of software have different like quirks about them and like what they're good at and maybe what they're not so good at. If you write a lot of games and you like maybe they're available on a website or something like that, then you have a good understanding, I think, of what it would take to do that. Narrative design is a really kind of specialty task because it requires a good understanding of narrative, which has, at the base level has nothing to do with video games. So kind of similar to what I was talking about with making a game out of a deck of cards. You could just write a story and really understand like how to break down stories and like the story arcs. That would be good experience to help out. But the tools that you mentioned, I think, are all good. And I don't really wouldn't say that one would be preferred over the other.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our Q&A, and I know we've gone a little bit over. So Stone, thank you so much. And thank you everyone in the audience for sticking with us for a few extra minutes as we close out our event today. Stone, thank you so much for such a great presentation on the gaming industry overall. This presentation is recorded, so it will be available on BRIC's YouTube channel in about a week. So if you want to catch the recording, rewatch, or take a look at Stone's slides again, because I loved that what is a game chart that you had created as reference, please make sure to do so. We also have an updated handout that we'll be sending out to our educators in the audience as well, with some more resources from Stone as well. So be sure to look out for that. And that's it. Thank you so much, everyone.
All right. And thank you, Sarah. And thanks everybody for watching.
Thank you all. Thank you, Stone.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.